In what seems to be an unprecedented action, the Department of Justice has written to the Associated Press informing them that the Justice Department has been spying on their reporters in a big, widespread, open-ended way that the AP got no notice about until receiving the Justice Department's letter. Specifically, the Justice Department says it secretly obtained 2 months' worth of phone records for more than 20 AP phone lines. It includes the main AP office numbers in New York and Washington, D.C. and Hartford, Connecticut, as well as the AP office for reporters who cover the House of Representatives. And it covers the work phone numbers and the personal phone numbers for 5 AP reporters and their editor. Now, there's no indication that the Justice Department has the recorded content of those phone calls, but what they've got, apparently, at least, is the incoming call numbers, the outgoing call numbers, and the duration of each call. Now, in response to this notification from the Justice Department today, the AP sent a scathing letter to Attorney General Eric Holder. Quote, "There can be no possible justification for such an overbroad collection of the telephone communications of the AP and its reporters. These records potentially reveal communications with confidential sources across all of the news-gathering activities undertaken by the AP during a 2-month period, provide a roadmap to AP's news-gathering operations, and disclose information about AP's activities and operations that the government has no conceivable right to know. The AP demands, quote, that you immediately return to the AP the telephone records that the department subpoenaed and destroy all copies. We also ask for an immediate explanation as to why this extraordinary action was taken and a description of the steps the Justice Department will take to mitigate its impact on AP and its reporters." Now, in its letter to the AP that started this, that provoked that response, the Justice Department did not explain why it sought the news organization's phone records. It did not give any details or justifications for targeting the AP, let alone in such a broad way. But we do know that these were the reporters and the editor whose records were seized by the Justice Department. And connecting the dots, we know that these 5 reporters and that one editor all contributed to an AP blockbuster report last year that the CIA had infiltrated an al-Qaeda plot to blow up an airliner. The bomb was reportedly a more advanced version of the one the so-called underwear bomber attempted to use on Christmas Day in 2009. Here was some of the NBC News reporting on that at the time.
And by all accounts, this is a remarkable success for the intelligence agencies of the United States and its allies. And here's why. They managed to insert a critical informant into the very heart of the terror group that's considered the #1 threat to the United States, al-Qaeda's offshoot in Yemen. Administration and intelligence officials say by the time this most recent plot was in its final planning stages, the U.S. and its allies were able to follow it in detail. What the terrorists in Yemen did not know at the time, these officials say, is that the person they chose to be the suicide bomber was actually an informant, someone who had agreed to cooperate with an allied intelligence service. Members of Congress declined to be specific, but praised the CIA and its overseas counterparts.
This was incredibly good intelligence work. I mean, this is intelligence at its best.
After the al-Qaeda operatives turned over the finished bomb, the informant then drove it safely out of Yemen, where it was eventually turned over to the United States.
So that was part of the NBC Nightly News broadcast on this subject about a year ago. That was one day after the AP published its big scoop. Now, the AP did not report that specific point that the CIA apparently had an infiltrator inside al-Qaeda. They what, right? But the AP was first to report that the CIA had disrupted this bomb plot. The AP reports that actually, quote, the CIA thwarted an ambitious plot by al-Qaeda's affiliate in Yemen to destroy a U.S.-bound airliner using a bomb with a sophisticated new design around the 1-year anniversary of the killing of Osama bin Laden. And now the AP reporters and the editor who broke that story, as well as the whole generic headquarters of news-gathering operations of the AP in New York and Washington and Hartford, Connecticut, have all been subject to an unprecedented, broad, weeks-long spying effort by the Justice Department that they were not told about until after the fact, and that we've never really heard of anything like this before. Within the last hour, the White House denied prior knowledge of the Justice Department's investigation, saying, quote, other than press reports, we have no knowledge of any attempt by the Justice Department to seek phone records of the AP. We are not involved in decisions made in connection with criminal investigations, as those matters are handled independently by Justice. Any questions about an ongoing criminal investigation should be directed to the Department of Justice. Is this legal? Can you say in an uncomplicated way that this is legal? Is it unprecedented? When do we get an explanation, and from whom should we expect it? And what happens next? Joining us now is Michael Isikoff, NBC News investigative correspondent. Mr. Isikoff, thank you very much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Rachel.
So what are you able to report? What are Justice Department officials telling you about why they didn't tell the AP about these phone records, about them spying on AP reporters and editors and news headquarters until after the fact, until after they'd already done it?
Well, what they are doing is pointing to Justice Department guidelines, or at least select portions of Justice Department guidelines, saying that they will not notify news organizations if doing so would pose a clear and substantial threat to the integrity of the investigation. In other words, tipping off the AP to this probe would allow them to tip off their sources and jeopardize the probe. Now, that can be interpreted in a number of different ways, but the most ominous for at least the sources for the AP or suspected sources here would be that they're close to bringing a criminal case. But what's really remarkable about this disclosure today is it is not unprecedented for the Justice Department to secretly get the phone records of reporters. We've seen it in a number of cases over the last few years, a number of criminal cases. James Risen, the New York Times reporter, had his phone records and credit card records and bank records all secretly subpoenaed. What's remarkable here is the sweeping nature of this, the dragnet approach. It's not a select subpoena for a particular journalist who they suspect has been got information from a particular source. This was a subpoena for more than 20 phone lines over 2 months, a 2-month period, multiple AP offices, New York, Washington, the AP office on Capitol Hill, home phone records, cell phone records. It's a dragnet, and that's why you have some press watchdog groups tonight and freedom of the press groups saying this is positively Nixonian. They have not seen a precedent for this in decades.
Well, on that issue of how widespread this dragnet was, as you put it, doesn't that affect whether or not this is legal? I mean, don't Justice Department rules about this sort of thing say that things have to be targeted as narrowly as possible in order to protect the freedom of the press? That's why I'm wondering whether or not we've crossed over from bad taste and political intimidation into illegality.
Well, there are Justice Department regulations on this, which do state that these subpoenas for news organizations should be crafted as narrowly as possible for a limited period of time. And that's what the AP, in that extraordinary letter it wrote to Attorney General Holder today, saying seems to be flouted here. But they're regulations. They're not laws. And this is a criminal investigation, and they do have the absolute legal authority to do this any way they want. But they would have to explain why they're not following their own guidelines and regulations.
Who do you expect that explanation to come from? Obviously, the White House statement tonight makes it seem like everybody should direct their questions to Eric Holder. Is that who you expect is going to have to explain this? Who do you think should come out publicly first?
It is very interesting because there's a lot of confusion about who answers this. Holder appointed last June 2 U.S. attorneys to conduct 2 high-profile leak investigations, this being one of them, Ronald Machen, the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., and there's another one involving the Iranian Stuxnet computer virus being handled by the U.S. attorney in Maryland, Rod Rosenstein. What's not clear is Holder's own role, because Holder testified shortly thereafter that he himself had been interviewed for this investigation, as had FBI Director Bob Mueller and, as we've since learned, CIA Director John Brennan, because they all had prior knowledge of this, of the matter that was, of the information that had been leaked. So it would be highly unusual for the Attorney General to have been interviewed in an investigation and then play an active role on it. Earlier today, today I had a Justice Department official tell me that Holder had been recused in this investigation. Recused himself. I've been trying to confirm that all night with the Justice Department and have not gotten a clear answer. I was told I would get one by the time the show has aired. I haven't gotten it yet. So it's very unclear who exactly approved this. If Holder was recused, the U.S. attorney could have approved this subpoena without consulting the attorney general, or it could have been another high-level official, the acting deputy attorney general, acting head of the criminal division. We don't know yet who exactly approved it, and we haven't gotten clear answers from the Justice Department tonight.
And if it turns out that it is a clear flouting of Justice Department, as you say, regulations on how broad these kind of subpoenas can be, then it'll be all the more important to find out who gave the okay. Michael Isikoff, NBC News investigative correspondent, thank you for helping us figure this out. I appreciate it.